Hello class. This week we're going to be talking about making decisions inside C#. The first thing that we need to talk about is the Boolean value. We talked a little bit earlier in the year about creating Boolean variables, and just want to go back over what those are. A variable with the type of Boolean is a true-false variable. If we in C# declare a variable called Boolean, we're just going to call this check, we can then set check equal to either true, or we can set it equal to false. And you'll notice as I type those in, they turn blue. It's not text that I'm entering in. True and false are actually values within inside Visual Studio. I'm not setting that equal to the text string of true. You'll notice it won't let me do that. So those are true and false are actual values inside of C#. And Boolean allows us to set a variable as either true or false, which comes in really handy when we start talking about decisioning here in just a few minutes. The next thing that I wanted to go over was what the equality operator is. We've talked a little bit about operators till this point. As you know, we can do an integer value and set it equal to, let's say, 1 plus 1. The plus sign here, this is an operator, and the equal sign here, this is an operator. In this case, this is the arithmetic operator, and this is the assignment operator. So what the assignment operator does is it says set this variable equal to whatever is on this side of the equation. When we go to check whether or not something is equal or not, we do that with the equality operator. The equality operator is just two equal signs in a row. So if I were to set check, which is a Boolean value, equals to 1 plus 1 equals 2. What this is doing right here is it's saying, does 1 plus 1 equal 2? Is this side of the equation equal to that side of the equation? If this is true, the value is true. If this is false, the value is false. So if I were to run this, you will see that check, when I do a check.toString, comes out to true. Because what we're doing here is we're checking to see if this side equals this side. That's what the equality operator does. There is also the inequality operator, which is exclamation point equals. And what that does is it says, it does the exact opposite of the equality operator. So it says, if this does not equal that, then set it to true. So in this case, this would be false because that does equal, 1 plus 1 does equal 2. So when I run this, you'll see we come out with false. That can get a little confusing when we talk about negating the equality operator, and there are other ways to do that when we start getting into if statements, which we're getting ready to do. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but just accept the fact right now that the equality operator is the equals sign, and the inequality operator is the exclamation point equals sign. So now let's go ahead and talk about if statements. Like I said, we're going to be talking about decisioning in C#. And the way the most simple method of doing decisioning in C# is with an if statement. And they're extremely easy to write. So if we just type if, and then we open a parentheses, and here we need to say what our statement is. What do we want to check? And it's important to know that every time you run an if statement, there's really only two answers that you can come up with. It's either going to be true or false. Always true or false. If we try to put anything else in there, it's going to error out because it's going to say that it can't explicitly or implicitly convert type of string to bool. And you'll see that a lot of times in if statements if you aren't using the equality operator or a Boolean value in there. So in between these two parentheses, when we're writing an if statement, we have to put something that either comes out as true or false. So if I put 1 plus 1 equals 2, because I've got the equality operator in here, and as we saw earlier, this is going to be true. This statement is true. 1 plus 1 does in fact equal 2. So we can do something. So now if I debug this, you'll see, yay, it worked, comes out. So that's how you write a very basic if statement. You say if, and then you check for equality. So we're in between the parentheses. We need something to come out to either be true or false. And then in between two curly brackets, we put our code, what we want to happen. So it's important to note that every time in C# that we need to section off a block of code. Like if we wanted to run more than one line here for this if statement, we could do another console.writeLine. This is going to run inside this only if this if statement comes out to true. Anytime we are sectioning off code like this, we use the curly braces. That's what they're there for. That's what we do. The same thing in main and the same thing in the class here. We use those curly braces to section off code. You can actually write an if statement without any curly braces. We could just put a line under here. And this is valid as well because we only have one line of code here. If we tried to put another line of code, notice as soon as I hit enter, the program or the Visual Studio goes back to this tab spot here. The reason for that is because good practice says that after an if statement you always indent. Visual Studio does that for you automatically. It does it if you put the curly braces in there for you again automatically. But if we don't use those curly braces, if we just are running one line of code, you can only run the next line. It will run that line. So basically what we're doing is by putting the curly braces in, we're saying run everything in between the curly braces. It's saying everything in between these two braces is one line of code. So know that that's how that works. So let's set this to false and see what happens. So to set this to false, I'm just going to use the inequality operator. So 1 plus 1 does not equal 2. So this is going to turn out to be false because 1 plus 1 does equal true. And you'll also note that it's going to give me an error here that says this code is unreachable because that's always going to be false. If I run this, you'll notice nothing comes out. So the reason why I did this was to start talking about the else statement. So Another type of if statement that you can do is what's called an if-else statement. If I put the keyword else directly under the if statement, put in a couple curly brackets, and put some code in there, now you'll see when that turns out not to be true, it's going to run this code under here, and you'll see that it did that. Nope, it didn't work. This is a classic if-else statement. So if this equals true, it runs the first block of code. Else, it's going to run the second block of code. Okay, I just wrote out a little bit of code here that makes hopefully a little bit more sense in what we're doing here with the if-else statement. So what I'm doing is I'm prompting the user to please enter a number. And then I'm taking the user input and reading it into this variable here that I'm calling checknum. I'm saying if checknum equals 5, then write to the console your number was 5. Else, I want to say your number was not 5. If I run this, you'll see it prompts me to enter a number. If I enter 5, it shows up with your number was 5. Run it again, and let's enter 4. It comes up and says your number was not 5. So let's say we wanted to check for 4 as well. We wanted to check to see if the user entered a 4, and if they did, we want to prompt them or we want to tell them your number was 4. We can do that by creating an if or a else if statement. If I type if directly after the else statement and then say checknum equals 4, we want to do a console.writeLine your number was 4, and then we're going to add a final else statement. This is valid code, and this right here is basically we're doing a multiple line if statement. We're checking for multiple things and doing different things with having this as a default. The else if statement, if you've taken any VB classes, else if is actually its own thing. It's not in C#. Basically all we're doing here is we're creating another if statement directly under this else. We're doing what's called creating a nested if statement. We're just doing it in a way that makes it easy to read. So if I run this and now we enter 4 as our number, it's going to come up and say your number was 4. So we could do this for all the numbers. We could come down here and do another else if checknum equals 3, do a console.writeLine your number was 3. And again, this is valid code. We can do this as many times as we want to. We can create as many of these else if statements that we want. There is, however, a better way to do this, and we'll cover that in just a minute. So just a minute ago, you heard me refer to this doing code like this as nesting. Nesting is a term that's used in programming. It just basically means putting something inside of something else. If we were to write what is traditionally viewed as a nested if statement, we can do that by doing if, I'm just going to say if true, add some curly brackets. I can run another if statement inside of that. And I can actually even put another else statement inside of that. And this is only giving me a, well, it was going to give me a warning saying that Oh, never mind. So this is traditionally what you would see as a nested if statement. If something is true, then run this if statement inside of that. And you can keep nesting if statements inside of each other. It will not stop you from doing that. It will allow you to nest them as far down as you want. It's generally viewed as bad practice, bad programming practice to nest things too intensely. The reason for that is because by running multiple if statements inside of each other, you slow down the program in general. So there are much better ways to check to see if, this condition here ends up being true by going through all of these different steps. We're not going to go into that in this week. That's a much more advanced concept, and I'm not even sure we'll get into it this semester. That may be something that we save for the advanced class. But for now, know that was nesting, and then this is also nesting. So like I said, I was going to talk about a better way to do this, and there is a much better way to do this. When you're checking one thing, which all we're doing here is we're checking the value of check num, there's something called a switch case statement that allows you to check one variable against multiple possible outcomes. And the way we write a switch case is just by using the keyword switch, and then we tell it what we want to check, what number or what value we want to look at. And in this case, we want to look at check num. And we have to put in some curly brackets here. And now we can write our case statements. And what our case statements are basically just possible outcomes of what this could be. So if we just type in case and then 1, and the reason why I'm using the number 1 here is because that's just an integer value. This isn't something that always has to start at 1. I could do case, like see if we were just going to mimic that up there, I could do case 5, and that's valid as well. And then we just need to tell it what we want to do. We want to do a console.writeLine, your number was 5. And then we have to do something that we have to add a break statement. So just accept right now that I have to add that break statement, and I'll go into why in just a minute. So we can create multiple cases. So we could do case 4, and note that this is a colon here. This is not a semicolon. So basically what we're saying is case 4, do whatever comes after that colon. So we're going to do a console.writeLine, your number was 4, semicolon, break. And then we'll go ahead and put in case 3. So what the break statement is doing here is it's saying don't execute any code after this. Up here we said in the case that check num is equal to 5, execute everything after this colon. And you can actually run multiple lines in here. And you'll notice that I didn't have to put in curly brackets. The reason for that is the way the switch case works is it says, okay, check this number right here. In case it equals 5, do everything after this colon. So it's going to run this line, then it's going to run this line, and then it's going to run this line. The break statement says stop executing and go to the end. So it's going to say don't even bother to check these other ones. Just break right here and complete the statement, which means go to this point in the code and then go on from there. So if we run this program, and let's go ahead and enter a 5, you'll see the first line that comes up here, your number was 5. That's from our if statement up here. And then the next two are coming from our switch case. If I run this again, put in the number 4, you'll see same thing. So what happened this time when it executed is it said switch, and then it checks that, and then it checks, was it equal to 5? No, it wasn't, so it skipped down to the next case. Was it equal to 4? Yes, it was, so it executed these 2 lines of code. And that's what a switch case does. This is an incredibly valuable line of code because this saves you a lot of effort in programming so that you don't have to write tons and tons and tons of if-else statements. Anytime you're really looking at something having a multiple outcome, more than just true or false, then you need to look at using a switch case statement. So the last thing to talk about in switch case is we did our switch. So switch says check this variable against these cases. We also have a special case called default. Default will run if it doesn't match any of the other case statements. So we can do a console.writeLine Okay, so now we just wrote our default case that says your number was not 3, 4, or 5. And the default case will execute only if none of those are true. So if I run it and put in 4, it doesn't hit the default case. If I run it again and hit in 7, you'll notice it's coming up and it's saying, okay, your number was not 5. That's from the if-else statements that we did up there. And then it's saying your number was not 3, 4, or 5. So we hit the default case down there. It's kind of important to know about the default because if you don't put anything in the default, if it doesn't meet any of these cases, it's just going to skip past the code altogether. It's not going to do anything. So remember, that's what default is there for, is to catch anything that doesn't meet your case statements. Okay, so now I want to talk about a special method that all of the primitive types, int, string, bool, double, decimal, all have. And that's called the try-parse method, right here, try-parse. What try-parse does is it returns a Boolean value, and the way it works is it will try to convert whatever string you're putting into it into whatever the type is. So it's going to try to convert whatever I read in here into an integer value. And in this case, I'm writing an if statement that says if this returns false, if this doing this equals false, then I want you to write invalid entry. Notice up here I'm using an output variable, and that's because this method itself returns a Boolean value. It will return either true or false. But by having this output value here, it's going to parse whatever string was put in here into this value if it can. So it's going to try to parse whatever I'm passing into it. So if we run this, you'll notice if I enter in a valid number, it executes. It says your number was 3. So in this case, this turned out to be false, so it skipped over this line and just ran this. And I know that's kind of confusing because since it returned a false, you would think, oh, well, it should execute. Well, no, if it returns a false, we're saying if false equals false, then do this. So we're basically switching the false into a true by doing that. So false equals false, that's true, so run it. But if false does not equal false, don't run it. So if I run this again and I put in a Q, you'll see it's going to say invalid entry, and it's not going to put in a valid number in there. It just puts the 0, which I defined up here, as the default value for my int value. Another way that you can write this, if I removed this equals false, it's saying if this turns out to be true, so if it parses and can parse whatever string this is into an integer value and store it there, it's going to run it. We can negate this by using the exclamation point. So if you use an exclamation point in front of whatever line of code you're running inside an if state, it's basically going to say if this statement is false. So instead of saying if this statement is true, do this, we're saying if this statement is false, I want you to do this code. And this runs as well. So if I run this and I put in a valid number, notice it did not execute the code that said invalid entry. But if I run this and I put in a Q, it does trigger that. So that's just another way of writing that line of code. It's a little bit more streamlined than saying equals false. Typically, when we're dealing with any Boolean value, we don't ever say if it is equal. We never check the equality of a Boolean value to true or false because they are in themselves true or false. So we either use the actual value of the Boolean or we say not the actual value of the Boolean. We negate the value of the Boolean. I know that's kind of tricky to understand. It's hard to say, and it's even harder to think about when you're coding. I don't know how many times I've been debugging code and found out my problem was that I should have been looking for a false value when I was looking for a true value instead. So it does get confusing and it does get tricky. My biggest advice that I can give you is just try it and see how it works and see if you get the expected outcome. If not, flip it around and see if you get the expected outcome with the reverse, and if you do, then chances are that's the way it should go. The only other thing that I wanted to cover tonight was checking we went over equality and not equality, but I didn't go over the other types of operators. I should have done this earlier in the lecture. You can also check to see if a number, so let's say my int value, is greater than a certain number. So I could say if my int value is greater than 4, I want to do a console.writeLine greater than 4. And if I execute this and let's put in 8, you'll see that my number, yes, it was greater than 4, so it executed. You can use less than as well. I can say less than 4, and we'll put in a 2, and you'll see that executes. You can also do less than or equals to and greater than or equals to. So if you put the equal sign after that and we run this and we put in 4, you'll see, well, it says greater than 4. No, it wasn't greater than 4. It's equal to 4, but you get the idea. So we checked my int value greater or less than or equal to 4, and it did execute. That turned out to be true, so it runs that value there. So those are the other equality operators that you can use. You can use check to see if something is equal to it. You can say whether something is not equals, greater than, less than, less than or equal to, and then greater than or equal to. All of those are valid equality checks that you can do. One last thing I did want to cover. In your book on page, I think it's page 283, it's 283 in my book, there's a section called the ternary operator. Go ahead and skip over that. That's something that, it's basically another way to do an if-else statement, but for now, we're not going to cover that. Just assume we'll get to that later on in the semester, or potentially even next semester. So you can skip that part of the book. You don't need to know how to do one of those. I won't throw anything like that at you for a while. That's it for the lecture tonight. The assignment this week, I'm letting you use the same code that you used for assignment 4 and assignment 5. We're just going to add to that code. In the student class, I want you to add a variable called full-time. And when you're entering this, the student, prompt the user to enter either a yes or a no for whether or not the student is full-time. And then what I want you to do is I want you to convert that yes or no into a Boolean value, so that you'll basically say if they entered Y, then put true. If they entered N, then put false. And then when you do the toString method in student, add a line that allows you to say whether or not the student is enrolled full-time or whether the student is enrolled part-time. And you should be using if-else statements to do that. In the class, create a integer variable called day of the week. And what I want you to do here is prompt the user to enter in the name of the day the class is held. So have them enter in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc., and then use a switch case statement to say, okay, if they entered Monday, then save it as a 1. If they entered Tuesday, save it as a 2, etc. And then finally, in the toString of that one, go ahead and convert it back to the name of the day using a switch case statement. Something that you'll have to know when you're doing that switch case to take it from the string they enter in to a number. If I do a switch case on a string value, let's just real quickly. So if I do a switch on my string here, when I do a case, I need to use quotations. So that when you're checking it, you're checking to see whether or not my string is equal to, and then Monday, this string here. So if we were just to type in Monday without that, you'll see it's going to give me an error. So make sure when you're doing a switch case statement with strings that you use quotation marks. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me throughout the week or post to the I Need Help forum. Other than that, have a good week and have fun with the assignment.